Welcome back to the Atomic Generative Advisor Weekly Office Hours and AMA, the show where we decode the matters of wealth one insightful conversation at a time. And today we do it again with Danny DeMichele, who is back from traveling, so that you can grow and protect your client's net worth, your own net worth, and more importantly, your net happiness in the age of intelligence. I'm Chris Snook. Danny, welcome to the show.
What's up? Thanks for having me. Nice to
Good to
see you.
see you back, man. Good to see you back. All right.
Yeah.
So, for those who are just jumping in the room, for those listening to this on replay, the thematic frame for today. We're going to start off with that real quick, and we'll get right into your audience questions, which were tremendous. So keep those coming each week as we write articles, as we put out new series. Please just send them in through the comments or whatever. We'll pick through the best and get to them on this AMA, as well as your questions in the chat. So if you are here live, feel free to throw comments, questions, clarity, whatever you need. Danny and I will do the best to get to all of them during our fast and rapid hour. The thematic frame for today: if nothing changes, nothing changes. I've been thinking about that a lot, but what I wanted to frame up today is, well, what happens when everything around you and I is changing and we are not? So as humans, we think in pictures, right? A picture's worth 1,000 words. We've heard that 1,000 times, and it's true. For those of us over 40, we still see a picture of the Terminator when someone says the word AI, whether we want to or not, flashes across the screen of our mind. If we're under 40, right, then that picture's probably ChatGPT or a Claude window to go type something into. The point is we have different pictures, and if we have different pictures, we're heading at different directions. And as a firm leader, as a client advisor, you can't have that because the world is moving too fast to have uncommon pictures. And so what we're doing this week is we put out a 3-part series called The Future of Advice. And you guys were great. You sent some things in. I'm going to share my screen for those who hadn't had a chance to see that yet. I'm just going to share my screen with that graphic so that you can see what we're talking about as a frame here. Give me a second. I'll get the screen share to work. Okay. If you're watching this on replay, you'll see it in the show notes. So as you look at this, there's a system of record, there's a system of intelligence, there's a system of workflow, and there's a system of trust. Where we're going to start and focus in with Danny, because this is the world he's lived day to day for the last 4+ years at Enbrain with the system of intelligence, the system of workflows, is how you can be thinking about it. Your questions that you sent in related to what it looks like to build the firm of the future, to rewire your firm, all center around these. And you can digest this at your own time, but essentially the system of intelligence and the system of workflow is where you build your proprietary value, because there are a handful of things that you and I get to own in our business as it moves forward that will not be commoditized, and trust is the one that will never be automated. And so as we get into that, there's your frame for the day. Danny, I'm going to dive right into the questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to get right into it. So, opening thoughts for you while I pull up the first question.
No opening thoughts. No, I don't have any.
All right.
Fire away.
I'm just doing a little dance there, Johnny Carson style. All right. So
Yeah.
here we go. So the first question that we had that came in was, where do we get started when it comes to, AI, right? Like, assume someone is played with some tools, looked at some tools, they've all heard the thing about, oh, it's not the person who gets replaced with AI, it's the person working with AI that replaces the person who doesn't work with it, and all these platitudes that are out there. But at the end of the day, that's the generic stuff, right? You've been on the front lines working in regulated industries, implementing things. Financial services is obviously a regulated industry. Compliance is a big driver of everything that they have to do. Client security, client work. Where do they get started?
Well, I'll tell you. I'll start with where you shouldn't get started, and you shouldn't get started at a. We see a lot of companies coming in, and they want to start with some kind of edge tactic. Maybe it's taking over a, a, a tactical process in the organization. But in that case, you're just building these. You're just sort of starting your whole journey with these uh, uh, autonomous, disconnected agents. And what happens is these companies just start stacking a bunch of these agents together. It's like a Franken build. The thing that needs to start first is you need to build your AI infrastructure, and it needs to be contextually aware of your company. And so a lot of companies think, well, I'll just, upload all my documents and we're good. It'll know about my company, but that's just it really doesn't provide the context needed for AI to do a good job. Um, in my opinion, the only starting point for a good, strong AI system is or platform is the communication layer. It's your emails, transcripts, because when you're talking to clients, when you're talking internally, that's really the context of your company. The true context of your company typically sits inside of people's brains, not in SOPs, not in documents sitting on Google Drive and SharePoint. That is good content. You definitely need that eventually. But without it really understanding like the soul and the purpose of the company, which is going to pop up inside of emails, inside of transcripts, it's just going to always do a subpar job. And so my recommendation always for companies is to start with, deciding on your foundation of AI. Where is it going to sit? Are you, I don't want to hit a bias stance because we believe very much in owning your own AI internally. But you can do this SaaS. You could do this on Claude. You could do it those ways if you want to, depending on the regulatory nature of your company and how much you care about data security. But whatever that is, you need to start with a platform and figure out a way to safely and consistently, without people having to think about, "Oh, I'm going to go put an email in or I'm going to go put this transcript in." That workflow has to be automatic because that behavior, it's going to take a long time for people to think proactively, "Oh, this email should be put in." All of them need to be put. The AI will decide what email is helpful, which ones aren't. Or, but for me though, it's transcripts. You have to almost start your process before you start the AI. Meaning, we'll come into a company and there'll be, let's say there's 100 employees, 20 of them are using one email provider, 80 of them are using another. All of them are using their own disparate transcription systems for calls. Some of them aren't using them at all. They're still picking up, a cell phone um, and talking. You have to do away with those processes. If AI doesn't understand the context of how you're communicating with people, how you're solving problems, how you're selling, um, it's never going to do a good job. And I think that's one of the biggest failure points that I see is people are really pushing away from that because of the privacy stuff. But look, Gmail already has your emails, right? Microsoft already has your emails. Your emails and your communications are sitting on Otter. All of these companies that these are sitting out there anyways. You can have an even more secure way of putting those into AI, right? And so don't let the not diving into the true nature of that like restrict you, and don't be afraid of that because it all of those things are being shared, stored anyways. There's a way to do that in a much more private nature, but that's probably one of the biggest failure points I see is not starting with that, the true context of your company. So I think that probably makes sense to you, huh?
Yeah, I'm bringing this back up because again, we flew through it in the beginning for context, but a picture's worth 1,000 words. So what you were just saying is what we're talking about when we look at number one here, right? If you look at the stack of a modern advisory firm, you and I, we exclusively work in regulated industries, and there's a reason why we do that. We can get into that later, but that's part of the bias that people need to understand. No one here is going to have a challenge with that unless they're a high net worth family who is dabbling in other things where they're not regulated and maybe they want to be a little bit more free with frontier models or things like that. But when it comes to an industry where, regardless of whether you're regulated or not, the baseline is the system of record. Now, it doesn't matter what system of record you use, right? Everybody has a different CRM. Maybe it's SaaS, maybe it's custom, doesn't matter. You have one. Maybe there's disparate, like you said, you got 100 employees and some people are using Zoom and some people are using Teams because you're remote or whatever, right? Some are on Mac, some are on PC. You have these systems of record. And right now, they know more about you than you know about your own company. and it's all disparate, and they're all implementing AI. So they're going to get better at selling you more of what they have. The question is, what are you doing for your client? How do you take your business and put the client experience in the center of that, starting with your own team? And that has nothing to do with AI. That has to do with what you just said, like thinking about the process of how you communicate information flows today. If it's verbal and it's all on the owner operator's head or the principal managing partner's head, fine. That's pretty standard. But how do you communicate information flows today? So to answer that question very specifically, start with where does information flow and how and to whom in your organization today? And then just map that on a whiteboard. Start to think about the
and
dis
and fix and fix it. You got to fix
yeah,
it because most companies, I don't care how tech savvy they are or progressive, all of them have holes in their data and communication, um, and that is a non AI fix, right? You have
right,
to fix that before you're using AI.
right.
You can certainly use AI to help fix that, but that has to be solved before you're jumping in, or you will be one of the 90% that you see out there with failed AI deployments.
And
Uh,
we work with family offices and other high net worth individuals, and the same is true there because their system of record is they have their insurance guy, they have their advisory person or their trading arm, or they have their legal and their estate plan, and they have all these different systems of record. None of them talk to each other in the same way. None of them talk to each other in the same system, and they're wondering when and how to get started with AI. And the point is, you can't start with AI unless you just want to make that problem worse.
Correct. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
right. So, all right. So that was a good point on that question. So let's get to the next question. We'll build on this where we're talking about once you have some of those things in place, now you have you have a chance to own your system of intelligence. So first, document out your systems of record, what they are. Figure out which ones you're going to keep, change, trash, or unify. That's what Danny was just saying. Then we can start talking about how you plan for your building your system of intelligence where you can actually benefit and go faster. So all of these things are great. So let's get into the next one. Let me come back onto the main screen here, and we'll get out of the screen share. So, all right. So the next question, Danny, that came in from the article that we wrote. Let me go on one that's related to that. So, all right. Assume that I've got some of that in place. I'm going to jump around here. So, somebody asked just a more practical question. So we'll jump around. So can AI move information between our CRM, email, calendar, planning software, and document systems safely? And I think that's a big concern in general because there's so much speed happening with this model, that tool, this. And that's if you're actually following it. If you're not following it, it's feeling even faster and paralyzing. So I think just baseline it for us layman's. Can it? Well, the answer is yes. But the real question I think they're asking is how do I move information between wherever I want to move it safely with AI? What do I have to know? What do I have to look at? How can we simplify that complexity for them?
Yeah. That's a good question. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways to tactically do it. One, you can build move and build your AI, move it, and it could be on a desktop on your desk, unplugged from the internet, and you could be using it. Like that's how call it safe. You can do it. So there's always a safe way, even safer than like the previous conversation that we're talking about, even safer than it sitting on Azure or Google or whatnot. So the safety part is just around who's controlling the core platform, and your core platform could be on your desk. It could be in office server room, or it could be in a cloud safely, right? Um, and the and really the movement of data starts with again the previous conversation where it's like we've got to go back to the whole data lake philosophy, right? Where is all the data going? The data has to be in the middle of your AI, right? It's got to be at the center. The AI is not at the center. Your data is at the center, right? And that's a you see all these graphs and charts that are out there, and it's like showing an agent in the middle. That's really not how it works. It's your data has to be in the middle, right? So who controls that middle, and how are you going to control that? Offline, online, cloud, on prem that's connected to the internet. That's the first decision. And all of your data from CRM, email, calendar, transcripts, whatever, get ported into that center data lake, right? The AI is sitting as a container around it in the form of an orchestrator. And so, step one, AI is not touching anything to get you in the middle there. Then you have this orchestrator layer, and I'll try not to get too technical, but the orchestration of an AI agentic model is probably the most important part. This orchestrator will decide who gets to see what, right? From an executive level, does the, you know what does Sally and marketing get to see and distill from the AI? And so it's managing, call it the user security permissions, but then it's also managing the query and deciding, okay, I got this query. What data do I need to go into and out of that data lake and pull to to solve my task? The orchestrator. Think of the orchestrator as like a coach on a football team, right? It's going to make the decisions, and it's going to send the team out, and it's going to and that team are going to be in the form of, call it, quote unquote, sub agents, right? You hear that term a lot. And that sub agent will have a specific task. I'm going to go grab this calendar to solve this query. I'm going to go tap into my CRM because I need that, or I need to go get some analytics to solve this query. And it's going to come back and it's going to have this big glob of content to then make an output, right? But that orchestrator is really the layer that matters. And that orchestrator, but a lot of people are creating it incorrectly. They're creating the agent level first, and then it's like on its own going and tapping itself into Google, and it's going to tap itself into transcript. It's kind of compile this. That's where you have security issues. That's where you've heard of the term prompt injections, where prompt injections will come in and pull data that it wasn't supposed to. That's where you'll get a mess from an output standpoint, because you're relying on Google's AI, API to stay on. Well, you know what? There's limits there, and it goes down sometimes. And now these orchestrators are coming back unarmed and unequipped with the right data. So really, it's just how you build this thing, right? And thought is, and again, it's people are thinking about the use case first. They're going out and saying, I want to make creating proposals easier. And then they go make an agent, and that agent goes to Otter and it pulls down a transcript. And then it goes to another role. They're almost like glorified Zapier connections, like strings, like old school Zapier or Phantom Buster, all the old hacker type of automations. And then there's kind of slotting in AI along the way somewhere, like on step 5 or something. And it's total upside down approach to how to use AI. And those are where the nightmares come out of. That's when you hear about security breaches or bad outputs or incorrect outputs. It's because you don't have a clean data lake layer, and you don't have a crystal clear orchestrator that knows the goals, the rules, the brand, the intent of the company.
I think the way I look at that, like in plain speak, right, and in an analogy is it's like the demo, it's like the demo dance, but like in production, which is not a good thing, right? Like when you think about electricity being democratized 100 years ago, which about 100 years ago it became affordable where everyone that wanted electricity in their house or their building or their city could pretty much have it. And we kind of we changed the whole economy because now you could have 24/7 cities. You could have 3 work shifts. You could have things that couldn't exist when we were living on kerosene as our main source of light and fuel and heat. And so when we electrified the world in the beginning, it was like the demos of like, look, we lit up a theme park at the Chicago World Fair in 18 or whatever, right? Like, look what we can do. And everyone's like, oh, wow. And so the use case will always come first because it's kind of like, it's the thing that gives
Yeah, yeah,
people.
and in that case, you have some Johnny electrician that's putting up because he could put up a circuit board breaker somewhere that's ill equipped. It doesn't have the right I don't know, I'm not an electrician.
Fire code or whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah, and then it's working for a few minutes, and then it blows up, burns down the building. And that's a perfect analogy, actually.
Yeah. So when you think about it, like what you're saying, though, as I think about contextualizing everybody that's, a regulated financial advisor, a lawyer, an accountant, the CPAs, the family office manager or principal, it's like evaluating where AI fits in their stack. It's like why they've hesitated is obvious. They know enough intuitively, just as a human, they know enough intuitively to like, if I rush in, I might end up regretting it. And at the same time, like they know that if I wait around too long, I might like it might be too late. Like I might this time it might be really different. And the thing that you're saying again is the analogy of like no one today sits there and says, "Look at my building, it has electricity," or "Look at my hotel room, it has beds." Like those things are a given. And but 100 years ago, like HBO Inside was a thing in the 80s, right? Like at a motel, HBO free, right? Like that was a feature, and that caused conversion. 100 years ago, electricity in our city or electricity in our building was a feature that caused conversion. Now it's table stakes. So when you look at the future of advice, table stakes will be you have a system of intelligence. It won't be something you get credit for. It'll be something you get to exist because of.
Correct.
And so the process now is kind of calm down so you can speed up. Calming down figures out what are the systems of record? How does information flow today? Where are the leaks today? Where is all this? And then what automations can we use that have nothing to do with just us cleaning up our system of records, even if we don't abandon those system of records, even if we keep some of those SaaSes or those enterprise SaaSes? Where do we own the layer of orchestration around our intelligence? Because that's the proprietary data that the large language models don't yet have. And if we feed it into them through these little pilots, that's what they risk. And in the regulated industry case, and I want to hear your thoughts on this because you didn't start there, but over the last year or so, it's really become the exclusive focus of your work is regulated industries. And part of it is because it's the vacancy that no one else is filling big enough, right? Because people go to jail when they screw up in this part of the planet. Like if they screw up in regulated industry, they don't lose a business. They might go to jail.
Yeah, yeah. You saw what just happened with Anthropic. I think Trump came out, and not to get political, but it was something to the tune of it's a really good thing that they pulled that model back, or they'd be in jail right now. That's exactly right. It's exactly right.
Right. So, inside of that world, I think those are the reasons why people have hesitated. Those are the reasons, but they also know they have to kind of move forward. And so we've given them a way to think about how to move forward. Now let's talk about so assume that they've got that. One of the other one would be assume that I've started to clean it up. So now I've got my hands around however I'm working with whomever consult whatever it is. I've got a hand around kind of how information flows and where I could get some quick wins. What is the first workflow inside of an advisory firm that you think is actually worth automating? And I would use you don't have to give up the name, but I would use the one with the avionics OEM
Mhm.
maybe as an example, because again, that supply or that manufacturing piece is analogous to a financial firm through the sense of like life events and things that might trigger a conversation that could actively move them to deploy new AUM or to get new insurance or to get a new tax strategy. Like there's things that happen that I don't see in my supply chain because I'm not talking to the people every day. But if I could build some way to see it, I know that that machine's open. So I want you to kind of use the example of the OEM and what they did with gold and an open machine, and we'll reframe it together for how an advisor might think about it.
Yeah. And you're talking about like trying to identify where to start. So you have
All right, yeah. So
the foundation where to
like
start.
use the OEM for the chip for the plane chip. Give us that example, and then I'll kind of draw analogies for folks on where I think that fits in the advisor world. Like we'll go back and forth. You just give the case study of like the first 91 days, what you found, what was a quick win, but then I'll use that as like how would a financial firm use it so that instead of raw materials and outputted chips, they're thinking of it as like client as the raw material, product
Yeah.
or service as the outputted chip.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is stepping back to that. So let's assume you have your data in a nice, clean, secure area, right? Um, and you kind of understand where you're going with your AI. So call that the orchestration or the platform layer. And now it's the tactic. So now we're getting into tactics. How do you decide on tactics? Well, it's also back to, I learn from experience more than anybody. You know that I kind of just jump into things, And when I started going back even pre that engagement, when I started in AI, it was the same thing. I went in and I'm like, oh, I can't wait to go automate this workflow or that workflow. But then I realized in a couple of years after talking to dozens of clients, doing some consulting, advising, strategy work, uh, we were sitting there painfully trying to automate a Web 2.0 process that was built around the fact that we had to keep people in certain places, and this is the tech only does so much, and so we have dashboards, and we have ways to search, and we have ways to click on things, and so what would happen is we would sit there and say, okay, great, we're going to build out this, and we're going to go replicate your human process, the process you've been using for 30 years. Well, that's crazy when you think about it. We have this. This is not a step up from Web 2. This is like no internet to internet, right? If you would have, when the internet came, tried to replicate, and instead of creating email, it's like, how can we better fax people, right? That would have probably been kind of a weird way to go about it, right? You wouldn't sit there, spend time on how do we make this fax clearer. It's gonna be like, no, faxes suck. Let's do this new thing called email, right? Totally new concept. It's hard to think about that now, but you and I are old enough to be in that. Um, and and people using it, it was obvious. But the so basically, what you don't do is go there and say, okay, we have these 50 tactics. Let's just start clipping these things off. The the magic around that data lake that we talked about with that orchestrator is you dump all the stuff in there, right? All your communications, all your emails, all your SOPs, all your documents, contracts. Uh, let AI decide what the use cases are. AI, you don't want to micromanage something that is smarter than you. I'm not going to go out and hire a staff of 10 PhDs from MIT to do a task and sit there and micromanage them. You're going to do this step this way, and then you're going to go to this step, and then you're going to go to this step. Like, no, I'm going to say, this is my goal. This is what I'm trying to do as a company. I'm trying to become more efficient. I'm trying to create a better service for our client experience. I'm trying to scale myself, right? Start there with the AI. Let it decide what it deems the right tactics are to go after. How to do that. Don't just say, "I want to get rid of Salesforce and I don't want to have to use this reporting tool. I just want you to replicate those." Like, that is not an AI first approach. You're basically using an MIT PhD to come in and figure out how to make coffee when your client comes in. Like,
Right.
that would crazy, right? So is that tracking with you?
No, I want to interject, but I want you to keep going. So I don't want to break your train of thought too much. I want to just repackage what you just said, as it landed me, because I think it was brilliant. So Web 1, right, was really what you just said. Web 1 was, hey, we had billboards and we had static yellow page ads and we had whatever, and we had magazines. Doesn't matter what the magazine was. And Web 1 was basically, look, now we can put them up on digital form. Like, and all it was the same ad, the same billboard, the
No, it
same,
was like you
like,
literally had a magazine and you'd flip the pages of the magazine.
it was the same thing, and it was just like,
Yeah.
now it's not physical. So there was no step function change. There was just a new way to get it without having the actual thing. So the experience actually didn't change, just and it got worse in many ways, right? Like, a magazine had a different value. It was tangible, it was tactical, it was pretty, it didn't hurt your eyes. Like, and so Web 1 failed because once the traffic and the bubble burst and the capital structures underneath it burst on the hype cycle, there was no there. Like, it wasn't what it was designed for, right? Like you said, it was the PhD making coffee for your guest. Web 2 was a step function change because it generated read write. It meant user generated content. It opened up a whole new world, right? And then social mobile, the 2 point whatever you want to call it, 2.5, right? When mobile became the thing, a whole new platform, whole new interface, and a whole new mobility function. So now Kodak could be disrupted by a 7-person company called Instagram, and Zuck could spend $1 billion, and everyone thought he was crazy, and he steals the thing, right? Like, for $1 billion, right? Like, basically, and you go, how the hell? And so those are the kind of changes you're talking about, is when you don't but that was still human centric. Now what you have is you have the ability to basically take everything you know about your information flows, like you said, your system of records, harness it inside of a system of intelligence you control and own. You can decide how much you want to spray and pray it to the frontier models or to an open source air gap model, depending on your comfort level or your regulatory environment. But the point is the open source models work just as well for the most part if you're willing to wait 15 more minutes. Right. So and you control them. What you do is you take the article series like we wrote, and you take the framework that I just showed at the beginning of this, and then you take all your comms and you say, how would I attack this framework if I was going to do it? And then you just let it ask you questions back.
Correct.
And then you say, and how would I prioritize this if this was my goal? And how would I prioritize if this was my goal? And now what you're having is 24/7, you're having a conversation with an omniscient view of the
Mhm.
soul of your company, the context, the weaknesses, the strengths, the uniqueness, the client dynamics, and then you're putting it against a framework that is actually built for this step function change that you and I are still trying to get our heads around, and we've been in it for 4 years.
Yeah.
And you start to really see some breakthrough ideas, and then all of a sudden you're leaping faster than any peer set, and they can't catch you.
Yeah, no, and that's and so to go back to what you originally wanted me to talk about, which was this tier 2 defense contractor,
Yeah,
which was it was at first I thought very ambitious. It was actually the first. We've always worked. Well, we've worked in regulated spaces. I've worked in regulated spaces. Go back 30 years from call it a marketing standpoint. Um, and in AI for probably 2 years, but in the last year, it was the first time of going into way out of my comfort zone and into a space that, yeah, I can't just get sued, but if I mess this up, I go to jail or the company gets shut down instantly. Not there's no court hearing, there's no like 3 years like
right.
fighting it. It's like, you're shut down, you're guilty until proven innocent. And so at first I didn't even know if I wanted to go into it, but we did realize that uh wow, we can because there's an inherent problem in how regulatory data works inside of AI, right? And typically you have to use what's called like bedrock versions of the models. So they're really stripped down versions. Think like right now we're on GPT 5.5. I don't know, are we 5.6 now? I don't know,
High
5.5,
five.
5.6.
Yeah.
Um, but you're still only getting the power of like 4.0 when you have your regulated data. But what we did is, so this was a big experiment on both sides. I went in like, look, I think we could do this. There's a route, but like we're gonna have to figure this thing out. So step one, we got their data into a centralized area. We're talking all of their data. They have machines that make microchips and pass chips to each other, and all these machines have their own tasks. So we were having to get all that data into it.
And
We
these
had to get all
machines
their
go on F-18s and on rockets and
yeah,
things
it's
like that. So
crazy.
this is
Yeah,
not
like
like yeah.
yeah, yeah, crazy stuff. Under probably one of the most scrutinous regulatory triggers called ITAR. So it's like basically this data cannot ever be in the hands of a non-U.S. citizen. Like it, it can't even it can't even flow by them, right? And so I was thinking at first like the things you want to ultimately do with AI, the available models aren't powerful enough. Like they're not going to get it done. But then there's this huge realization that yeah, only 3% of the data because we had AI do it. We put all the data into this centralized area. And we had a limited model, the approved model, Bedrock version of AI go through and it answered me. I just had one question first. Here's all the data. What stuff can I can I put into a frontier model, right? And what stuff can I not? And it came back with 3%. 3% of it was unable to go into a frontier model. 97% was. I'm like, okay, boom. We just got our workaround. And so what we were able to do is basically set up an infrastructure that anytime data table one, two, three, or four, or five, we can use a frontier model securely, absolutely privately, right? Doesn't get shared with the models. GPT or Claude are not training on it. Um, and then for the pieces that was touching ITAR regulated data, it would do its analysis synthesis there synthesize the data, and give it back to the frontier model to perform the tasks we needed to. And when you know when and if I would have micromanaged that, you know what my answer would have been at the end? It would have been like, this project's not doable. We can't do it. Like, you can't. Your data has ITAR in there. The models are not advanced enough to do what you want to do, like reading schematic drawings and things like that. That would have been my answer if I would have micromanaged my way into it. But when I just told AI, um, started with, tell me what I'm working with here. My goal is to get the most out of the frontier models in a safe and secure way, while making sure we do not violate this ITAR regulation. And it's the one that came back to me and said the client didn't know that, to tell me that only 3% of it was
They wouldn't
ITAR.
have known. How would they
In
have
the
known?
client's mind, it's all the same data, right? And in my mind, it was all the same data. It's like, you know, and so so in that case, it's like we didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We were able to use the power on 97% of this thing, and if we wouldn't have had the AI, AI works better with goals than it does with instructions. Like that,
So
if
the
anybody could
thing that
take,
came out of that, the thing that came out of that was a dual cloud single platform
yeah.
interface, right? So that's part of what that was one of the first innovations and that you developed inside of that. So talk about that a little bit, because that 3%, did that go into the other, Azure instance, and then is that dealing with an open source or a kind of hardened air gap model or not? Like, or is it just being left
in,
alone?
in their case, it is a on-prem. You could do it two ways. They have an on-prem, disconnected from the internet, open source LLM model. And for anybody that's listening to this, unless you're doing financial work for the government, if we could, basically, if this model works for ITAR, it works for anything. There's no regulatory piece it can't work for. They chose an on-prem, and there's a lot of reasons why they chose the on-prem. Everybody has to decide, but you can do the same air gap model in the cloud. You could do it with Azure. Azure has it. AWS has this. Um, On-prem is, in my opinion, better, but you also need in-house IT for that. Like, it's something you have to manage, keep up, make sure the internet's not going down. You need to have redundant internet. Like, so there's some things that you kind of need to have an on-prem that is always on
You could also
100%.
do a hybrid, depending on the size and scope, but you could do a
Well,
hybrid.
they are a hybrid. They have their lockdown ITAR data sitting on-prem, 97% of it in the cloud. And so I think that for the most part, I like on-prem better. Makes me feel safe, secure. It's a lot faster too when you think about it. You're not having to worry about an internet pipe now, because you have direct access into that LLM, that local model. But on-prem also gives you another advantage, which is, when you're using an open source model that you're hosting, self-hosting, you can basically distill that into your own long-term SLM model, small language model. So now you're not just making an agent smarter, you're literally building your own private localized SLM, which, in my view, will be the biggest IP asset there is 2-3 years from now. Like, if you're a company that has IP, let's say it's IP around how you manage clients' portfolios. Imagine that being in a privately owned, self-contained small language model, token free, no token costs. Um, Imagining the license ability of that, or the asset value of that, very well should be worth more than the company itself moving forward, and call it AI 2.0, which will be here in a year. Will be.
Yeah, and I think that SLM, concept for financial advisory firms, what we wrote about in the one piece titled AUM used to be your greatest asset. It isn't anymore, right? Because financial firms have often, and they're still, they're modeled at 6 to 7 times fees, which is based off of the AUM, right? So if I have 1% or 70 basis points on my AUM, I got 100 million under management. I'm making, $700,000 to $1 million a year in revenue. and I'm going to get $6 million on the street all day long for that if I want to sell that book of business to somebody who's rolling me up. And now what we're talking about is a system of intelligence and an SLM for my proprietary way of whatever model portfolios, client experience, estate planning, asset protection structures, whatever your thing is, tax strategies, da 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 da. And more importantly, and you and I've seen this, right? Like it just came out before Fable 5 got banned, right? We were laughing about this. Not laughing, but we're joking about this. Like,
crying first.
you're crying first. So Fable 5 comes out, boom, benchmarks crazy out the door. It's like it's a real change from 4.8. 4.8 was great. And 3 days later, it's like we're addicted to it for certain things. And then they shut it off. But the other thing was before they shut it off, they had already said by June 22nd, it's not going to be in your $200 a month plan anymore. It's going to go to API costs. Now, you and I've been spending API costs forever, so that wasn't a big deal for us. But for most users, they're going, hey, I have the $200 a month pro plan. That's still less than 1% of the planet, by the way, is even paying $20, let alone 2%, 200. But for those who were, and who were actually like using any kind of frontier model, they're being subsidized heavily. These companies are all going public in this kind of current market cycle to get out of it before the market corrects and CapEx spending gets exposed and all the things that everybody's writing about. So what do you think they're going to do? The same thing Uber did when they stopped subsidizing rides to the Phoenix airport for me at $18, losing money, and the same ride started costing $47. My experience changes when the cost goes up triple. If I've put my intelligence into that thing that I don't own, and now I have to lease it back for $200 a month.
Yeah, you are.
If now I have to lease it back, and it's a variable cost now on my usage, and I've gotten used to getting a couple grand a month for free because they were subsidizing me to grow.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, it's a $2,000 a month bill I wasn't expecting, which means I either have to stop using it as much because I can't afford it, or those who can afford it go exponentially faster than me and I lose anyway.
Yeah.
And having your own SLM is really the key, because most of what the frontier model does, you're not going to care about. What you care about is what it does for you.
Correct. Yeah. My thought is the frontier models are going to, like, when we build, I'll always build on a frontier model. Like, I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Right.
But the actual
you're talking about the actual coding.
Yeah, the actual coding, right? Look, I'm going to take, if I have to spend 10 times more for Fable 5, I'm going to do that because it's going to make my job easier. I'm going to have a better product. And I don't think that changes anytime soon. But the actual application sitting in the cloud, most applications, the actual in use that you're using it does not need frontier models. Very rare we ever have a client that we're using the latest and greatest. Like, we were using Fable 5 ourselves. Like, we blasted. I couldn't even sleep when it came out. Like, it was so strong, and so we got a lot of use out of it. The 3 days it was online, but we didn't change our clients to that model. It was totally unnecessary. It was a total unnecessary piece where an SLM, your own model, could have been very capable of it. And because we are going to be there is a infrastructure. People hear about all the data centers being put up. We're still at 5% of the infrastructure needs that we will have as early as next year. 5%. So how do you get around that other than things like surge pricing, what you talked about? So forget just the fact that you have to pay for every API call. Well, that's going to go up and down, in real time, right? There's no doubt in my mind that will happen. And then it'll also be token allocation. Yeah. So when you're relying on, let's say, Claude 4.8 for your model, well, even if you could afford it, the reality is you're not going to get allocated the tokens. And so you're not going to even be able to tap into your own intelligence until they tell you, here's your new allocation of tokens. It's like in the 70s when it was the gas wars. It's like, no, you get 5 gallons of gas. That's all you get. Like, you're not getting any more. You better figure out how to use it. I don't want to be in that world. Like, and the only way
it's a great proxy. It's that on steroids, right? Because again, at some point, physics and atoms run into bits, right? These two things converge, and one of the ways that we'll feel it, both as professionals, as advisors, as anyone using the thing, will just be rationing, right? It is not going to be smooth, because when you realize that this all comes down to memory, and the scarcest resource out there, and the companies to back are the ones that have the toll booth on memory, which is the chip.
Yeah.
That's the physical constraint. And then you have the power that makes that even possible, right? Which is the other physical constraint. And then the commodities that need to go into it, right? The gold that goes into the rocket chip that,
Yeah. No,
is
I
sitting
like,
on the laboratory
yeah.
floor. And when you
Yeah.
think about the national security interests and everything else, you and my little pet idea or our little financial advisory firm doing 10, 15 million a year in revenue with a couple billion under management, we're going to be the last in line. We won't even get a little tin cup to hand out to ask for a little token allocation because defense will be first.
No,
The
and then
price,
it'll be token aggregators that have, that are, we're trying to, we're overspending on tokens direct with these models just so we could be maybe ahead of line, right? There's going to be these cutoffs. And what's going to happen is you're going to get these super users, Anthropic, that are going to literally resell those tokens. They're going to resell their allocation. You're going to be going through APIs to get to the API, and there'll be markups all the way through. That doesn't happen with your own model. That doesn't happen with an open source model. And and what's crazy is if you would have asked me even 2 years ago, hey Danny, you're going to get into the small language model space and build your own models, I laughed you out the door. I wouldn't know how to do that. Well, guess what? AI does that for you. AI is what is building that model for you. You don't even
Tor,
have. Yeah.
our collaborative engineer, ex Palantir guy who we've built, kind of our own private AI lockboxes with that we're deploying into, some of these regulated clients and also kind of made a special one for family offices and that was Tor's in the chat. He was your replacement last week when he and I did the AMA and he just put this in there, literally just ran it in real time, right? So frontier models are trained on 90% of quote what everyone knows. But most agencies, most firms, most fiduciaries, most accountancies, most RAs, broker dealers, you put yourself whatever, right? Need to leverage the data that only they know. And that's the thing that's the big difference, right? So if 90% of what's in the frontier model is what everyone already knows, then you have access to the world's intelligence. Just think of it that way. You already have access to the world's intelligence. The world does not have access yet to your intelligence. So why would you give it to them before you package it, containerize it, and get the benefit for your firm? That's the IP you're talking about, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Only you know what you know. And that's trapped in all your comms to tie this thing back together from your earlier system of record starting point, right?
Yeah.
And he said this paraphrase something I say when asked about why local models can complete with Claude's latest is 90% of it's there, 10% is not, and the 10% that's not's worth everything in the future. And the trust that you can get from the client experience by basically not only securing that, keeping that there, but also moving them through their customer journey and their life of managing their assets in a human way because you have access to this knowledge now at your fingertips that only you knew is where all the delta is. It's where all the alpha is.
Mhm.
So anyway, great point, Tor. Thanks for that. Let's see if there's another question in here. We had 10 or whatever that came in. All right. This kind of talks about a little bit. Let's see. What can AI complete on its own? Where should a person always approve the next step? So talk about that a little bit. Like, what have you learned over the last 4 years on like how big of a leash you give it, right? Because there's all kinds of different frameworks out there for like, I want to be a human in the loop or I want to. So you've put thousands of rules into your orchestrator based on just experience and learnings and mistakes. And how are some of the current state like check boxes looking for you? What do you just let it do? What do you not let it do and why?
Yeah. So, I mean, what I do is, I mean, I kind of in the beginning bucket it in reversible tasks. So, like this screwed up, we can reverse it tasks.
Like
Or,
two-way doors versus one-way doors.
yeah, or irreversible. So,
Okay.
client received it, and we can't reverse that. Like, client already got it, right? Or front end experience. So it's really actually quite simple. Reversible tasks. So things like that, maybe I have an automation that gives an internal, maybe let's say you're my boss and I have to give you an executive report every week and I want AI to automate that report. Very easy for AI to do. I most likely can do it a lot better than you, but it might be wrong, in the beginning while you're tweaking it. Well, as long as you have a culture that's okay that it's wrong internally. We know we're going to get things wrong when we're communicating with ourselves or creating outputs for ourselves. Um, let those start those on autopilot. Take the risk, take the step, right? And just everybody knows that before that we take this maybe executive view, executive knows that like might need to double check some of the numbers just to really make sure, right? Irreversible tasks, you need to have human in the loop. So irreversible tasks might be if you're a wealth advisor and you have a strategy that you want AI to put together. And let's say that thing it really knows everything about you. Like we really tune this thing. Well, the reality is you're going to want human in the loop for 3 to 6 months at least that kind of checks before it going out. And so some companies that we have that are really conservative, they'll add human in the loop on everything. So full automation, but no one sees it until a human comes in, looks at it, call it puts it in a queue somewhere. And so really you want the AI to do its full job, right? But you need to just decide where are the most critical parts. So if this is an irreversible task, where are the most critical steps that this thing would have probably gotten wrong, or should I check? So let's say that there's a very complex irreversible task that
Well,
ultimately.
let's use the ITAR. Let's use the example of like machine number 6 is open. We don't know it. We got a
Yeah,
pile of gold
exactly.
over here
Yeah.
because
So
that's irreversible. Once I put that gold into a production, I can't reverse it.
yeah,
So
exactly.
where
And so let's
use
say,
that example.
so like in their case, let's say that there's 10 steps there's significantly more, but just for easy math, there's 10 core steps, and every step needs to be accurate for the next step to be accurate, right?
Mhm.
And that's a lot of processing also over these 10 steps. There's gigabytes of data, and forget if it's even client facing or it's irreversible at the 10th steps. Like you've wasted a lot of time and money and token costs because step one was incorrect by a decimal or a
Right.
fraction of a number, right? What you want the human check-in when inference or the output occurs in that step, there needs to be a human checking it or an agent checking that step. I think critical steps, you still want humans until you're starting to feel comfortable with it and you're seeing it. Like, so the way we do it is we build the whole process for it to be free of any human steps. Like the process will work from step one all the way to step 10. But what we then do is sit with the client and decide where in the steps do we need to include a human queue step, right? And so build it for the entire sequence and automation to occur, and then come over the top and decide where do we want human steps. And then as the humans are getting more comfortable, okay, for the most part, it's always validating it, right? Sometimes it gets this one little thing wrong. Can we is it a non AI? Can we create a non AI, maybe machine learning, more black and white check in there that doesn't require inference? It just requires like a if win statement. Then we can create automation to take the human step out of that spot, right? Or we can overlay an agent to double check it before it goes to the next step. And then just over time, you're going to see when you're at a better accuracy than humans because you're never going to get 100% just because you're never going to get 100% with a human. I don't care if you have Elon Musk working on your production line. Like it's going to be wrong sometimes, and that's just business. But you just got to get it to the point where it is better or has less error prone than a human does, and then you can wipe that human step out of there. We always have for these complex systems either mechanical process step that is in between or an agent inference step in between critical pieces because it doesn't cost a lot. It's really looking at the end result, comparing it against other end results, or looking for a very specific type of error that would typically occur at that. So they're very light agents to get in the middle there. But again, I'd say to summarize, build the whole thing as if you're not going to have any humans in the loop, and then come in and before you launch it, decide where do we want humans in the loop for this, and just be willing to take risks on the reversible processes. Don't
Yeah.
take the risks on the irreversible processes at first.
Right. Yeah, just
Yeah.
list them out and then say, is it a one-way door or a two-way door, or is it reversible or irreversible? People use different language, both mean the same thing. You
Yep.
have two ways of now answering that question and then categorizing. That segues right to the last question I want to ask you as we wind up the hour. So this one came in. John said, how do we introduce new workflows without overwhelming employees who are already busy serving clients? There's two parts to it. You kind of already hit the first one, right? Should we automate our current process as it exists or redesign the process before adding AI to it? You answered that earlier when you talked about stop thinking about it linear in that way, right? So we'll skip on that. But the first part of this question is key, right? How do you introduce these new workflows or this new process without overwhelming employees and shutting them down? Because one thing that we know about ourselves is none of us resist change, but all of us resist being changed by an external outside force. Like that's our immediate reaction, right? It's, oh God, right? Yeah. And then everybody has a panic moment because they see the job loss or they see the FOMO or they see all this stuff. Um, and then how do you measure it? So what are your thoughts on that? Because we've seen that done wrong. We've done it wrong, like introducing it to client. Like we've seen it a
Yeah.
lot in the last 4 years. It's probably one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah. The biggest issue is it's within the internal culture. This is, and it's not some rah rah speech about culture and that crap. It's true. If you have, let's say that we're trying to help Johnny do his job better, or produce more results, or whatever, be able to do more work. Um, Johnny needs to be bought in day one. Johnny needs to understand why this is helping him, not automate him. Um, and he needs to be part of the process. He needs to understand the process. The biggest issue we have is we will have an executive team deciding what Johnny needs. Johnny's not in the room. We build something for Johnny, and at call it pre-launch, we're now introducing Johnny to his new process. Right? Of course, he's going to fight back on it. He is going to find every critical flaw he can in the process to make sure that this thing doesn't go out because he wasn't part of it. He wasn't bought into it. He doesn't understand how it kind of fits into his role, into his future. And so you just got to bring them in early. You got to explain, you got to gamify it, right? You got to explain that this is a process and we need your help with this process because we want to let you do the work that you should be doing more, not the kind of mundane things that you hate doing anyways. And because what happens is you launch this thing, right? And let's say it's 99% flawless. Well, that person who hasn't been bought into it, who hasn't, spent their who hasn't been part of the process is going to focus on the 1%, and it's going to simply report up saying this thing doesn't work. And they're not going to spend the time and effort because they don't see how it helps them. Like we're humans. Like, yeah, to me, I'd be looking at it as an absolute existential threat to my existence. Of course, I'm going to look and focus on the 1%. And so now you have teams of people focusing on the 1%, not how do we get it from 99% push through. So get them excited. They should be. It's a huge opportunity for them to be working with AI. It helps them to.
Well, and I also think I tell people all the time, if you haven't seen the movie Hidden Figures, there's a scene in it. It's a great movie for a lot of reasons, but it's about, kind of the unsung heroes of the moon launch back in the 60s. And there's a scene in there where basically an African American woman who is basically, the bottom of the totem pole right at this thing inside this government agency realizes that Fortran is a thing that very few people understand and that these mainframes are now going to be everywhere.
Mhm.
And she just goes, I'm going to learn Fortran. And I think if you enroll your people, however they are, client facing, admin, compliance, doesn't matter. If you roll them in the fact of electricity is here, we will never wire firms the same again with intelligence, just like we no longer expect there to not be lights on in a hotel room or a building or in our house. It's table stakes. And we want you to be part of how we do that. We don't know what that means. We're not here to promise you a future job. We're not here. All we know is that none of us have a future if we don't figure that out. So let's figure that out together.
Exactly.
And your future is yours to decide, because if you find the thing, if you become our agentic person or our process engineer or our reversible versus irreversible decision maker, you can leap from where you are to some level in the company that's irreplaceable.
Yep.
And that's for the right kind of team member. that's the opportunity. You're not replacing their job. You're replacing the job they have that they may not want. And if they don't want it, well, then
Yeah.
you've at least invited them and you can make a decision later. So you're not promising jobs that may not be there. You're also saying, I'm not going to force it down your throat because you're just going to get resistance and then your spend is going to be basically wasted. So I think it's a really good point. And on
I think it could be the biggest investment in that employee should look at it as an investment in their future, whether it's at that firm or the next. And and if they're not looking at it that way, and you just can't get through to them. Maybe they're not the right person.
right.
But it does start with the culture, and it's being done wrong right now.
Yeah, I agree. Awesome. We have way more than we have time to get into. Guys, thanks for joining us for another weekly AMA on the Generative Advisor. Danny and I are here every Friday at this time slot, or if we need to move it, we adjust it. We communicate that in advance, but you can count on it every Friday. We're here for weekly AMA. Sometimes we have guests. Please tune in. Please drag a friend. Hit the share button. Hit the like button. Hit the restack button. Do all the things the algo. It needs your dopamine, not me, not him, but it needs the dopamine hit so that we stay in the feed. So please do that and subscribe. Hit subscribe to Danny. He's moving some great stuff into Substack as we speak. So subscribe to his channel. If you're already subscribed here, thanks. And Tor, thanks for the comments. Those who tuned in, thanks for that live, and for all those on replay. Enjoy the article. We'll see you guys next Friday with more. Thanks, Danny.
Thanks. See you later. Bye.